Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into a subtle yet significant force in the corporate world.
Yeah, we're talking about the negative impact of specific behavioral patterns, sometimes, linked to psychopathic traits, on a company's culture.
And we're drawing on insights from a chapter that really dissects this whole
Our
relationship.
mission here really is to get a handle on how certain behaviors, and let's be clear, we're not talking clinical diagnoses here.
No, definitely not.
Right. How these behaviors can chip away at the core of a good workplace. Things like trust, ethics, employee well-being.
And exploring this might, well, it might resonate with some of your own experiences, past or present, in the workplace, give you a different lens maybe.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start digging in. The chapter we're looking at really emphasizes that when individuals showing these patterns get into influential roles, the culture can, well, it can really go downhill.
Yeah, quite significantly.
And a key first sign, the analysis suggests, is this deliberate creation of a competitive and also kind of an opaque environment.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the competition they foster isn't always about, say, beating market rivals.
Right.
No, it often seems to be more of an internal tactic, a way to maintain control. The leaders might set things up so employees are pitted against each other.
Like how, specifically?
Well, think about things like really unfair project reviews, maybe,
Right.
or systematically sidelining certain people. The point is, this internal conflict isn't accidental.
It's manufactured.
Precisely. It's a power play, essentially, a way to keep dominance. That's a key thing to look out for, the source suggests.
And the immediate fallout from that kind of internal fighting is you really see trust go down among colleagues.
Absolutely. Collaboration just gets pushed aside.
People become focused on, I guess, just watching their backs, outdoing the person next to them.
Yeah, and that sounds incredibly draining. The material points out it leads to lower productivity, lower morale. It makes sense.
Then there's the transparency issue you mentioned, this opaque environment.
Right, a lack of openness. It becomes a tool. Yeah. Information gets managed, shared very selectively, usually to benefit whoever's in charge.
Which makes it tough for employees to really get what their role is or, make good decisions.
Exactly, if you don't have the full picture. So you see this mix, forced competition and controlled information. And it just eats away at trust.
It creates a kind of secrecy, almost by design, it seems. Power gets more and more centralized.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the analysis gets really sharp, I think. The chapter looks at how ethical standards start to slide under this kind of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Not just like one bad apple, but a system-wide thing.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. When it's all about self-interest and there's little empathy, ethical lines get blurry or just ignored.
So you might see unethical stuff being, well, maybe not cheered on, but certainly tolerated.
Or even subtly encouraged, yeah. Things like puffing up accomplishments, maybe fudging reports a bit, as long as it makes the person in charge look good or achieves their goal.
So ethics become
yeah,
disposable.
kind of, yeah. If it gets in the way of self-interest, it's pushed aside. It fundamentally poisons the environment. That's the real takeaway there.
And the long-term damage sounds pretty severe. The whole company could lose its ethical bearings.
Misconduct becomes the norm, almost.
Imagine being an employee in that situation, feeling like you have to bend your own rules just to get by.
It's bound to hit morale hard. And you expect people to leave, right? Higher turnover seems like a natural result.
Yeah, the analysis definitely points that way.
And linking this to the bigger picture, you often see this intense focus on immediate results, short-term gains over any real long-term plan.
Right. It's all about the now.
Exactly. Quick wins, hitting those quarterly numbers, often, without much thought for the long-term health of the company. Can you think of some subtle ways this might show up?
Well, maybe like intense pressure to meet targets, even if it means cutting corners or using practices that just aren't sustainable. The source mentions things like maybe imposing totally unrealistic deadlines or turning a blind eye to questionable tactics if they deliver, right now.
And that really brings up the question of the organization's future, doesn't it? Those quick wins might look good on paper for a quarter or two.
But they can seriously undermine the company down the road, erode public trust, and the toll on the employees themselves.
It's a recipe for burnout, definitely, not sustainable success.
Then the chapter gets into how these individuals might actually reshape the organization's structure itself to, lock down their power.
Oh, interesting. So not just influencing the feel of the place, but the actual org chart.
Yeah. It's about changing how things fundamentally operate.
How would they do that? Like deliberately make things more complicated?
Seems like it. Maybe creating confusing hierarchies, unnecessary layers, putting loyalists in key spots.
So it's not about making things run smoother.
No, the analysis suggests it's purely about consolidating control, maybe creating roles with overlapping responsibilities or unclear reporting lines.
Ah, so it makes it harder for anyone else to figure out who's really in charge or to challenge decisions.
Exactly. And maybe promoting people based on loyalty, not necessarily skill, which concentrates power even more.
And that would naturally push things towards a very top-down style of management, right?
Yeah, the source talks about fewer chances for employees to give input. It's just directives coming down.
Right, one-way street.
And a big casualty there often is innovation. Creativity.
Makes sense. If people don't feel heard or like they have any real say.
They're less likely to stick their neck out, propose something new, and the whole organization can just stagnate, become less agile when things change in the market.
And this whole value system, the one driven by these behaviors, it starts to seep into everything.
Yeah.
The chapter points out how integrity, empathy, they get devalued. It's almost like the good stuff, the things that make for healthy teams, become liabilities.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. The focus shifts entirely to individual wins, cutthroat competition.
And in that kind of climate, people might feel they have to undercut colleagues just to get ahead.
Which just demolishes collaboration, teamwork, and ultimately makes the whole organization less effective.
And maybe one of the worst parts discussed is how this breeds a culture of fear and distrust. It sounds genuinely toxic.
It really does. Leaders like this often use threats, manipulation. Those are their main tools for control.
Like Naito Yayudo's research highlights, right, on psychological manipulation in companies.
Exactly. There's a calculated aspect to it. And the result is people feel constantly on edge, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of saying the wrong thing.
And that fear, it doesn't just feel bad, it actually paralyzes people, the analysis says.
Right. They become risk averse. We already touched on how that kills innovation.
But it also messes up communication, big time.
Yeah. If you're scared, you're not going to speak up about problems, are you?
Yeah.
Or share vital information.
Even if it's critical. So small issues don't get flagged, and they can blow up into major crises later on, all because nobody felt safe enough to raise a hand.
And it's not just fear of the leader, is it? It spreads. Distrust becomes general.
Yeah, the chapter explains how these leaders might play people off each other, manipulate information. It fuels conflict between employees, too.
So instead of a team pulling together,
You get individuals just looking out for number one, self-preservation mode.
which understandably tanks overall efficiency. And disturbingly, this fear can also push people towards unethical behavior themselves.
How so?
Well, the analysis suggests people might just go along with questionable stuff or even participate just to avoid getting targeted.
Wow. So it becomes like a twisted survival tactic.
Seems like it. And yeah, unsurprisingly, all this just crushes morale, leads to burnout, and people heading for the exit, higher turnover again.
Building on that, the chapter really emphasizes how insidious information manipulation can be.
Right. It's not just not sharing things, it's actively twisting the narrative.
Concealing things, distorting facts, like Yudo Naito's research points out as well.
Yeah, classic tactics like really hyping up any small success,
Making it sound bigger than it is.
while burying failures, sweeping mistakes under the rug.
And that just kills honest communication. How can anyone make good decisions if the information they're getting is skewed or just plain incomplete?
Plus, controlling the info flow creates that opaque atmosphere we talked about. It breeds suspicion, isolates people, makes them reluctant to share what they know.
It feels like a strategy to keep everyone slightly off balance, maybe uncertain.
Could be. And the chapter mentions how pointing out others' mistakes while dodging any personal blame just destroys trust even further, kills any chance of real teamwork.
And again, the ethical angle. When the leaders are playing fast and loose with the truth.
It sends a message, doesn't it, that honesty isn't really the top priority, which could encourage others to cut corners too.
And ultimately, making decisions based on bad information, that puts the whole organization at risk. Serious risk.
Okay, now the analysis gets to a really core trait: prioritizing self-serving goals.
Ah, right. Where the organization basically becomes a stepping stone for the leader's own career.
Exactly. It's like the company's actual mission, its purpose, gets sidelined.
As Yayuto Naito's work suggests, right, that lack of empathy, lack of ethical responsibility means the organization's long-term health just isn't the main driver. Personal advancement is.
So the whole reason the company exists, its mission, its vision gets twisted or just ignored, makes it really hard to achieve anything meaningful long-term.
And you see it in how resources are used, maybe?
Yeah, the chapter gives examples like using company assets, even people, to boost their own career,
Yeah.
often pulling resources from other important areas.
And manipulating relationships, controlling communication. It all prevents a shared understanding of what the company's actually trying to do.
It loops back to that erosion of ethics and undermining commitment. If the boss is clearly just in it for themselves, why should anyone else pour their heart and soul into it?
Yeah, it creates confusion about the mission, the vision. Morale drops. Engagement suffers.
And crucially, this self-focus often means devaluing what others bring to the table.
Right. It fosters that winner-takes-all vibe. Teamwork, recognizing others' efforts, that just doesn't compute.
The chapter then talks about how this often leads to a more authoritarian culture.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty restrictive.
Oh, definitely. Think excessive control, really rigid hierarchies, squashing any kind of employee autonomy.
Top-down decisions are the only way. Strict rules, and if you try to be creative,
It's discouraged, maybe even punished.
and the result of that, predictably, is people playing it safe. Risk-averse behavior.
Afraid to step out of line, afraid to suggest anything new, which, again, kills innovation.
And communication gets choked off, too. Information flow is controlled, right, as a power tool.
Not to help people collaborate or solve problems, no. It isolates people, maybe fosters competition between them, just wears down any trust that might be left.
So the very things that make a company grow creativity, new ideas, they get stamped out because people are afraid.
And the chapter says, again, short-term wins get prioritized over investing in, long-term innovation.
And the psychological cost.
Yeah,
Constant monitoring, micromanagement.
that puts a huge strain on people. Stress, disengagement. It leads to this kind of organizational conservatism, just stuck, not dynamic at all.
And finally, the chapter tackles the lack of long-term vision head-on, which seems almost inevitable after everything else.
It does, doesn't it? That drive for immediate results means long-term risks, sustainability. They just fall by the wayside.
Like Naito Itsuhito observed,
Yeah.
the focus narrows right down to immediate profit.
Yeah, often sacrificing important long-term investments.
Like what kind of things?
Well, maybe cost-cutting that weakens the company long-term, like
Yeah.
layoffs, or de-emphasizing R&D, employee training, the stuff you need for future growth.
Things that are vital, yeah.
And ignoring those long-term risks makes the company really vulnerable to market shifts, new technologies, things you need to plan for.
It's just reactive, not strategic.
Exactly. And think about the employees again. If there's no investment in the future in their development, why stay motivated? Why commit?
Your performance is bound to suffer if you feel the company doesn't care beyond the next quarter.
And that short-term pressure can also lead to cutting ethical corners to get those quick profits, which damages the company's reputation, stakeholder trust.
And without that long-term vision, it's just really hard to stay competitive over time.
Yeah, you lose that edge.
Okay, but thankfully, the chapter doesn't just leave us there. It moves on to recovery, how organizations can bounce back from this kind of influence.
Which is crucial. It's not necessarily a permanent state.
Right. There's hope.
And the source brings in Takehiko Kasuga's ideas here. He talks about the human vulnerability, the anxiety these environments create. So rebuilding that sense of psychological safety, well-being, that's paramount.
And a key part of that rebuilding, according to Kasuga, is setting up regular feedback loops, open communication channels.
Actively fighting against that secrecy, that opacity we discussed.
Yeah, and really rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
And leadership has a huge role there in showing they're committed to openness.
The chapter also stresses how important psychological support is, like counseling, mental health resources.
To help people process what they've been through, regain confidence.
Exactly. Kasuga really emphasizes that leadership needs to build an environment based on security and trust, not fear. A fundamental shift.
Then the source brings in Yumeki Hirayama's perspective, focusing on fear, extreme conditions.
And the message there is pretty clear. You absolutely have to get rid of fear-based management.
Full stop.
Yeah. Hirayama pushes for supportive, understanding leadership styles, and critically, removing the leaders who are the source of the fear. You need to create that psychologically safe space.
And what about the divisions, the conflicts that were created?
Hirayama suggests actively tackling those, resolving conflicts, promoting collaboration, maybe through team projects, rebuilding those connections.
Ending fences, basically.
Exactly. And finally, both Kasuga and Hirayama seem to agree on the need to overhaul the rules and really recommit to solid ethical principles.
Like strengthening whistleblower protections, rewarding ethical actions.
Yes, tangible things like that. Steps to restore faith that the organization actually stands for something decent.
Okay, so summarizing that recovery path, it's about transparency, safety, psychological support, ditching the fear, fostering collaboration, and getting the ethics back on track.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It does, but essential, it seems.
And what's really interesting, I think, is that these aren't just about fixing the past. They're about building a stronger, more resilient, maybe more human organization for the future.
That's a great point. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, the main takeaway seems clear. These negative behavioral patterns aren't just personality quirks. They can deeply damage the health of a whole company.
Yeah, it's systemic, not just isolated incidents.
And understanding these dynamics, recognizing them, that feels like the vital first step towards building better workplaces.
Healthier, more ethical, and probably more successful in the long run, too. Places where people can actually thrive, collaborate, do good work without fear.
So maybe something for you, the listener, to reflect on. Have you seen echoes of these patterns in your own working life? How might this perspective change how you view those situations?
It's definitely food for thought.
And perhaps the deeper question is, what role can each of us play, in our own spheres, to encourage cultures built on trust and respect, regardless of who's at the top?
Yeah, fostering environments where our better human qualities are seen as strengths, not weaknesses. That feels like a shared goal we can all work towards.